Anthony, I mean, we've talked about this off the air. Was this just a poor decision by Derrick Lewis, or was it the right decision?
It was an absolutely poor decision. This was terrible, like really, really terrible. And maybe if the guarantee that he was getting from the UFC for those 8 fights, which I doubt that he fights that contract out, by the way, if that first fight he's getting $2 million, okay, now we're talking. But we know that's not the case. Like we know, we're pretty certain that without us looking at the contracts and as journalists being able to say, oh, we know for a fact that that's not the case, we can say pretty confidently he ain't getting 2 mil. Yep. You know, it just does. And then also too, the thing is, like, the UFC was always going to be there, right? So if he tests free agency and PFL has the best deal for him, he gets that 2 mil to fight Francis Ngannou. No matter what he does after that, right? If it was just a 1-fight deal he signs with PFL, which I believe PFL would do something like that, they would sign him to a 1-fight deal for this Ngannou fight, right? Win or lose, right? The UFC is still there. Derrick Lewis is still a name that's going to attract attention. We just got news of, and I don't remember who originally reported this. I saw something on Bloody Elbow, I believe it was, about this, that in the Jake Paul fight, Nate Diaz reportedly made more than he did in his entire UFC career. That's the type of money that is sitting out there. If you have, a name to you, if you are an exciting fighter and you have a name, that is the sort of money that's sitting outside of that octagon right now. Nate Diaz, keep in mind, if that's true, that he made more in that one fight than he did his entire UFC career, keep in mind, this man fought McGregor twice. Yes. Once on short notice, and he was hard bargaining getting that fight.
Yep.
This is also a guy who's fought for the title at some point, right? When he fought Benson Henderson for the title a couple years back. So we're talking about somebody who is not just your average fighter. He's like the upper echelon fighter. And this guy, in his one fight, made more than that. And Derrick Lewis, with the sort of name he has, with the reputation he has, with the highlight reel that this man has accumulated, he didn't even give free agency an honest try. I find that absolutely insane. And then even if you take PFL out of the equation, I mean, I know we're going to talk a little bit about Bellator later on, but I mean, if they're still shopping for fighters, man, I definitely can see a world where Derrick Lewis is the heavyweight champion in Bellator.
Yeah.
And the money that can command and the sponsorships that can command. Like, I think this was horrible, horrible decision-making on his part.
And the silly thing about it, if the reports are true, it's an 8-fight deal, which we saw. This isn't like MLB, NBA, and you have a multi-year, 8-year deal, and you're guaranteed money. 8 fights don't mean anything. Why 8 fights? Other than clearly the UFC gave him that money, they gave him that amount. We've talked about before, not here, but off the air, like the managers are always questionable, kind of. Some of the managers at MMA are questionable. There's no benefit to 8 fights. Why not take 3 fights? Why not take 4 fights and then test it by? So he's clearly locked into a deal that we all know how tough MMA contracts are, especially UFC. He's ironclad. He's probably never going to get out of this deal now because 8 freaking fights, which is a terrible decision. And again, he doesn't test his value at all. Like, you're 38. He's kind of in just entering heavyweight prime. And you mentioned it. UFC's always going to be there. Trust in your own brand value. You are a popular fighter. Okay, you lost. You're still a popular fighter. UFC's not going to turn down money. If you're available out there, and let's say you beat Francis or you're still a name because you were in a successful pay-per-view with Francis, they're still going to sign you either way. They're not going to just not sign you. And hypothetical, they don't. Again, that PFL deal, and also a part of that PFL deal with the $2 million, I'm guessing maybe it could be different for Francis' opponent, but part of Jake Paul joining PFL for the pay-per-views was fighters are supposed to get a percentage of those pay-per-views. So if he can get $2 million plus percentage value on a card that, hey, maybe it has Jake Paul and Nate Diaz in MMA, maybe it has, what a miss. What a huge miss. Like, Get the bag while you can, because there's few bags out there. Like you mentioned, okay, outside PFL, Bellator is a shaky option just because their future is so questionable now. But here's weird angle. There's value to a African American man in Asia. It's a weird thing, but Asian people love Americans and just African Americans. Rampage talked about it when he was in Pride. They just have a thing for him. So the chance of the sponsorship dollars and going to Risen and going to one championship, like, because there's an appeal about like this. It's exotic to people in Asia.
So glad you mentioned that, because Bob Sapp has made an entire career of getting his head kicked in and tapping out too early.
Yep.
By that same thing. There's so much money out there for a guy like Derrick Lewis. And then we were just talking about the celebrity boxing angle. You tell me that you're not going to be interested in, Derrick Lewis versus Greg Hardy on like an undercard for one of these Paul brother fights or something. That is a very sellable thing. And he could make so much money off of that, and it would just be for one fight that he makes this money, as opposed to, an extended sequence with the UFC. Which, by the way, that 8-fight deal, this is something that they give out to guys when they're on their way out of the sport, because this is just going to lock them in, and they don't become valuable to someone else.